All right. So welcome back. Here we go with another session on U Squared by Pritchett. Today we're on page 13, and we're on the chapter of think beyond what common sense would allow. Think beyond what common sense would allow. Isn't that something? Like we're all raised to think about common sense. Like everything is common sense, but yet we are told not to. We are told in this chapter that you got to go far beyond your common sense, because he's going to talk about way greater performance that we've ever seen. And he's not thinking 2, 3, 4, 5%. He's not even thinking 10% or 20%. He's talking quantum leaps of results, like huge results. Okay. So let's think about it. Let's see what he says. Most of us can be found flying too close to the ground too often. We don't give ourselves permission to soar. A 10 or 20% improvement isn't the idea at all. That will represent only incremental gains. This reminds me of the word of like the eagles, right? Eagles soar. Like they're like way up there. They're not down by the ground by like the little birds, and they're up there, way high up. That's what he's asking us to think. And the idea is to like let loose, let yourself go there. It's time to start focusing on possibilities rather than on limits or obstacles. It's time to start focusing on possibilities rather than on limits or obstacles. Making a quantum leap means moving outside your mental boundaries. If you will rethink how you're thinking, you can multiply your performance potential. You must let your desires guide you, instead of allowing yourself to be boxed in by the perceived constraints. Because we have perceived constraints of what's possible and what's not. And if we go by that, we're going to keep getting what we're getting. So he's mentioning the things that we need to do and move towards so that we allow the new thing to come. So he said, if you will rethink how you're thinking, you can multiply your performance potential. You must let your desires guide you instead of allowing yourself to be boxed in by perceived constraints. Seeking the quantum leap means violating the boundary of the probable. It means achieving well beyond the obvious. So don't limit your desires to what you think you can have. Start going after what you want. This means you must give yourself permission to dream, to risk. You must set yourself free. A 10 or 20% improvement isn't the idea at all. That will represent only incremental gains. 10 or 20%. Most of us would be happy with 4%, 1%, 3%. He's talking a 10 or 20% isn't the idea at all. That will represent only incremental gains. There might be an impressive performance in some situations, like if there were unusual obstacles or a very difficult set of circumstances. But while such a goal might be challenging, it would not represent a quantum leap. Instead of an additional 10% or so, a quantum leap produces a dramatic and multiple gain, an exponential increase. Quantum leaps are by definition rather astounding, certainly unconventional. Don't get the idea that absolutely anything you can think of is possible. It isn't. But in some areas of your life, what lies within your reach is enough to stagger the mind. You can double your level of success, triple it. Far beyond that, you can leverage up your performance to the second or third or fourth power or beyond. See, this book is called U Squared, and now he's mentioning second power, third power, fourth power. True, there are limits, but you don't need to worry about them. Your real limits are far beyond your artificial mental boundaries. The real limits won't box you in, but the false ones you're carrying around in your mind are a self-imposed prison. So how do you break out of that jail? Because we are limited, and he's talking about this jail that we're in our perception and our reasoning and our limitations. Even though we have higher mental faculties, that's what gives us free will, we have these limitations. So how do you break free out of that jail? Look at this. Through surrender. Through surrender. You might probably remember Mahatma Gandhi. You probably remember some of the greats. You probably remember some of the, like Mother Teresa, and how much of a big of a movement do they make in the world, right? You have to forfeit some of your old beliefs and sacrifice some of those sensible thinking patterns. So-called common sense can be a curse that puts a ceiling on how far you reach or how high you fly. U squared, the quantum leap strategy, is based on uncommon sense. Because we have these common senses, what we see, hear, touch, feel, taste. And that affects what we think and what we become and how we adapt and what we say is possible and not possible. But he's saying, let all that go and start using your higher mental faculties. That's your memory, your reason, your will, your focus, your perception, your intuition, to a whole other level. And it's very good one. How do you break out of that jail? Because we're in this like contained jail. I think yesterday or the day before I talked about if you're inside a jug, you're stuck inside that jug. If you put a pumpkin inside a jar, it's going to grow as far as a jar. And that's how we are. We're inside a little jar. What if we can expand? What if you can expand your thinking? And it's not like by any other means, because he's saying we already have it. This power, we already have it. So whatever you're seeking is seeking you. That desire that you want, the reason you've got that idea is because it's pulling you towards it. And our job is to surrender to it through surrender. I like this other line here, halfway through that page. She says, don't get the idea that absolutely anything you can think of is possible. Because right away, some people will say, oh, I want to make $100 billion. Well, you can. But if you haven't made $1 or 10 or 100 or 1,000,000, you're not going to make 100 billion. If you haven't built an apartment, one door, you're not going to build 20. If you haven't been, and it doesn't mean we need to go incremental, but it's the experience that we're going to go through. It's the growth that we're seeking. I think that's what he's going after. But also at the top of this page, he said, you must let your desires guide you instead of allowing yourself to be boxed in by the perceived constraints. It's a really phenomenal chapter. It's really worth reading several times. I've read it once or twice yesterday. I read it twice this morning, and this is the third time. So I want you to keep reading it. But I also want you to think of something that, because we've been talking about this, because now the Olympics are happening in Paris, right? And we mentioned that just the other day, right? Like, how do you rise above? How do you rise above the competition? And one of the media news groups, they showed this beautiful picture of Simone here. Rise above your competitors with an Olympian's mindset, right? So what kind of mindset do you have to be in to rise above? What kind of thinking you have to be in, right? You have to be an elite athlete, an elite leader. This potential that you have is waiting, and it's your job to unleash it and to get it to come out with playing with teams, working with teams, having fun, growing, putting common goals, and going at it day after day after day after day. How do you think she got there, right? I want to show you another picture of another athlete, because that is just also phenomenal, right? Think of here, like if you look at this, right? These are the top medals, like gold medals. How many of them have received them? From Caleb to Mark to Carl to Michael Phelps. But you could see, right? They didn't just get there, right? They did a whole quantum leap. But if you ask yourself, what did Phelps do differently? How come he's so far off? 23 gold medals, and some of them are 8, 9, which is really amazing by itself. But yet he's at 23. And if you ask him, I'm 100% sure he would say mindset. He's very focused. He was very, very focused. And a lot of them would say that. So that's the session for today. And that's all for this lesson. We will continue again with another one tomorrow. Suspend disbelief. That's tomorrow. Suspend disbelief, which is pretty cool. And again, we've been reading this also as well, the self-confidence formula. So if that's something you want, we can email it to you, reach out, and I look forward to reading for you again. Take care.